This monster is a dinner plate tree from Southeast Asia, and it's actually used as a dinner plate. They use the leaves to eat their dinner out of. And a friend of mine grew this for me from seed. I grew it from seed and lost mine, and he kindly brought me around one of his seedlings about 2 years ago, and it's looking absolutely beautiful. He was looking over and said, why is that lady sending you her red undies? And I said, because I'm sending her my fishnet stockings.
Hello and welcome to episode 94 of Talking Dirty. Over at East Ruston Old Vicarage in baby blue, we have Alan, Edward, Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist.
And a shining light in Cambridgeshire. The sun is not shining here this morning, and I don't think it probably is with you. Middle of the country, we've got a little bit of cloud this morning. We have Thordis Maria Sophia Fredrickson looking absolutely blooming.
And joining us back, we haven't caught up with him since episode 31. Can you believe it? The one and only Dig Guru Charles Dowding, who I think I was so excited to meet last time. I didn't ask for your middle name, which is something we always do on this podcast. Do you have any middle names, Charles?
Yeah, two. William John.
Solid. Charles William John Dowding.
Hello, everyone.
The reason you're back with us is because you have another book out, the kind of book that's really going to stand out on the shelves. You've picked a very good colour for the cover. It's very cool. It is absolutely packed with information, and I am genuinely really excited about it. I've been delving into as many sections as I can, but I can't wait to sit down and have a chance to actually read it cover to cover. Tell us, I mean, everyone knows all about you and can go and listen to episode 31 to kind of get your background, but tell us how exactly the book came about.
Well, it's through Chris Young, actually. I'm sure you've come across him at different times. He was editor of the Garden magazine.
Yeah.
And so I've known him for quite a while. I've done some articles for him for the RHS. And he then had this idea. He'd seen that I hadn't worked with a big publisher for a while, if ever. And he thought, wow, Dorling Kindersley, because he's working for them, could do something really good. And the initial proposal was, the book working title was Charles Dowding's Vegetable Growing Masterclass. So it wasn't specifically no-dig, but it was going to feature no-dig in a big time, because that is the basis of it all. And we worked all last year getting all that down on computer. I was going to say on paper. And then we got it. There's a lot of information about growing all the different kinds of vegetables. That actually 2/3 of the book is that. That's the second part, if you like. But the first part starts with no-dig, and then they decided to change the title. Seeing how much interest, suddenly it's really taking off now, no-dig, and it makes a very simple title that stands out very nicely. But within that, or beyond that, there is a huge amount about growing vegetables as well. So it's a bit like my life's work so far in one book, which I haven't really done before.
That is what it feels like. It does feel like your life's work on paper, about 100 pages explaining all of these principles that you've dedicated your life to discovering, and lots of research, explaining exactly what's going on in the soil, how to set up your no-dig garden, etc. And then just like, was it nearly 200 pages of all of the different things you can grow and your favourite varieties and all these bits of key information about when to sow and how to space.
Thordis, it could easily have been 1,000 pages because that's where it's been great working with DK, because they're so good at graphics and all these kinds of things. So there's a huge amount of information distilled into those pages. And also, I was working last year with Jonathan Buckley, the photographer, who I'm sure you've come across. And yeah, he's brilliant. And it was a real pleasure to work with him. He came down here for 13 whole days last spring, summer and autumn. And so we've got those amazing photographs. And what I haven't had before, I've never worked with a professional photographer when I'm writing my book. So I've had the chance to be photographed doing things. And there's a lot of my hands, for example, actually showing the reader, how that works.
Were you a bit self-conscious about the photo shoots? Because I know you've done a lot of video and photos over the years. So are you used to it now, or do you get a bit sort of butterflies?
To be honest, I'm totally used to it. I just get on with things. And as soon as he stopped clicking and I'm doing something else, it's just like, part of the day.
Yeah, my time to
that works
shine.
Well, actually, because I think it looks quite natural. Yeah, and the garden always looks nice here as well. And I never have to sort of get it ready. They just turn up and film a working day almost, you could say, with doing a few special things.
And I mean, Alan, you'll know from the photographers coming to East Ruston how lovely it is to sort of see your plot through someone else's eyes.
Well, yes, it is. They also put a new slant on it, a slightly different slant on it, I think. But I was very, very taken with what Charles just said. It's just like another working day, but we're doing a few special things. And I think that says it all, because that means that you declare yourself as an honest gardener. I mean, you don't rush around getting things ready, putting props up and all the rest of it. You take me as you find me, which I think is absolutely brilliant.
Well, it's one of the lovely things, actually, Alan, with No Dig, because it's easier to have a weed-free garden, for example. Occasionally people might come along here and say, "Oh, you've been busy weeding, get it all looking nice for the open day," or whatever it might be. Actually, no, that's how it always is.
Yeah,
straightforward. That's what I want to share. That's what I want to share with the reader. Actually, how gardening can be simpler than it's often made out to be. And there's a lot about not exactly cutting corners, but doing away with unnecessary rules, if you like. Like, I very seldom harden off seedlings. I don't do a 4-year rotation. I water in bright sunlight, when necessary. So all those kinds of things, just to make life easier.
I think it's absolutely brilliant. I have a rather bad infestation of chickweed in one of the beds in my vegetable plot. And I was looking at it the other day, and we just planted out, it was about a month ago, maybe 5 weeks, 6 weeks. We just planted out oriental vegetables, right? And I suddenly thought these vegetables are going to be spoiled by the fact that, because chickweeds are minute little seedlings, and there's so many of them, and you can never really weed them out properly. And I'm thinking, I'm going to be talking to a man who knows better than this. So I think I'm going to be thinking about using your no-dig method, because it just seems so sensible.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. As soon as you say chickweed, that's what I think, because there's a saying around here in the farming world: chickweed follows the rotavator. And I know from experience, where I've used a farm rotavator in my 20s, that, you rotovate a field, you get it all looking nice, and then within 3 weeks, it's a carpet of green.
Absolutely.
And that happened to me in 1987. I sowed an acre of carrots. I got them sowed by a contractor after rotavating the ground, because there was a shortage of organic carrots, and I was just experimenting. I was no digging in my main garden. I just thought, I'll try this. We could surely grow an acre of carrots. And he drilled the carrots in early April, and then it was a damp spring, and there was so much chickweed. I can totally relate to what you're saying, but I don't see it in no dig. Because it is a weed of disturbed soil. So that's what it's saying to you, Alan. You go no dig.
I did wonder whether you have some other means of communication, and you were telling me that I need to go no dig.
It's night and day.
He's communicating via chickweed.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking about that acre of carrots. I'd never harvested one carrot, so that for me that was a really strong lesson. You don't need many of them.
Do you know what I think I found? There was a bit in the book which is talking. You have these wonderful sections, these delve deeper sections, which actually handily are a different colour, so that as you're flicking through, you can actually say, right, here's one of those bits that's got vital information in that I need to get to grips with. And there's this bit all about the universe under our feet, which was one of those sort of flashes of understanding and inspiration, talking all about the soil food web. I know people need to go and read the book, but can you talk a bit about this soil food web?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not my phrase. It's quite a well-known way of looking at soil. It comes from Professor Elaine Ingham, who's in Oregon University in the US. And she's worked for a long time. She's a soil microbiologist. She must be over 70 years old now, but her whole life has been about looking at this. And she's built up a huge understanding about this matrix of life, which we're always walking on, but not seeing. It's usually working on our behalf, helping plants to grow, and just understanding it better. And one of the big things, the big takeaways from her work is no dig, basically. Leave it alone. And there are ways to stimulate it and encourage it, and it leads you into looking at soil in a biological way rather than chemistry has tended to always be the center stage, and people talk about feeding plants, and this is more about feeding soil life. If you feed soil life and look after it and leave it alone, that soil food web just goes strong and healthy and huge, and it generally works with plant roots to help them find nutrients and moisture. And that's one reason actually why with no dig you do get better moisture they put up with a shortage of water better. And we've seen that this summer. A lot of feedback I've had from no-dig gardeners in the dry, hot summer, about not that they don't ever need to water, but their plants are putting up with it much better. They've gone no-dig.
Yeah, there was this sentence about organic mulches add organisms to the soil food web. The idea of you're not actually necessarily feeding the plants directly, you're feeding this food web in the soil, which then helps all of those symbiotic relationships that are going on between the mycorrhizal fungi and the roots. I mean, it did blow my mind a little bit. It felt like it was tapping into something I'd sort of started to understand, having spent years gardening, but it had never clicked in quite that way.
Oh, well, I'm really happy to hear that. That's great feedback. Thanks. You could put that in a review on Amazon.
Well, funnily enough, I did go and read some reviews on Amazon, considering the book is literally only just out when we're recording this. One person had said, I've got loads of books on compost and loads of books on, keeping your veg patchy, books by you. They felt like this was the only book they needed because
that's nice.
It actually had all the stuff in.
But yeah, that going back to your point there is really interesting one, and how for all our amazing knowledge about looking after plants, and this applies to ornamentals as much as food, vegetables. I don't think there is a huge amount of understanding about how exactly roots get hold of what they need, and the fertilizer aspect of it has taken over rather, and it's been presented as though the root is like a mouth, and it can just open and swallow that NPK you put on, and yet it turns out from what people like Elaine Ingham are discovering and looking in microscope, really studying what's going on there, and it's really complicated actually, but in a nice way. We don't have to know because they do it, but all the bacteria that are involved and the different dissociation by the mycorrhizal fungi, it turns out they can take nitrogen off cell walls. I only learned this last night in a video link someone sent me, and use that, and then the cells rebuild their walls. Just incredible things like that all going on that we didn't know until recently.
I'm just loving watching Alan's face.
Well, I mean, you could say I'm gawping in wonder, I think.
That's a good description.
Right. Yeah, I mean, well, look, for example, I don't reckon I'm using a huge amount of compost. They'll say to me like, oh, I couldn't do no-dig because I can't get enough compost. But actually, if you don't disturb your soil, it's very carbon retentive. This is a great message now, because you're not losing carbon to CO2. It's not being oxidized. It's all staying down there. And therefore, you actually need less compost in the end to grow the same amount weight of food. And I'm finding this with my 2 trial beds here. So I put on the same amount of compost, and the one that I dig every December gives about 10% less food every year. And so actually, for no-dig, you need 10% less compost, you could argue, to get the same amount of food. It's a really efficient way to grow.
Charles, if you're starting from scratch, can I just ask a question? For instance, my chickweed-ridden plot or bed, if I'm starting from scratch, how much material do I need to put on at the very beginning, the first lot, the first layer?
Well, I'm pretty sure that you, being the good gardener you are, your soil will be in good heart. You've been adding organic matter over the years, so it's not like you need to build a lot of fertility there. And chickweed is quite an innocent weed, actually. It's really easy to mulch. It's not like couch grass or bindweed.
No.
So if I were you, you might, I mean, I don't know what you're going to do right now because you want to get your Oriental harvest, master's harvest, whatever, but cardboard is the easiest way. And you could use as little as 1 inch of compost on top of that, because it's just enough to hold the cardboard down. Chickweed will die under cardboard. It'll keep light off it for long enough before the cardboard itself decomposes. So it's a temporary light excluding barrier for weeds. And then you've got a lovely surface. And the only weeds you'll then have will be whatever seeds were in your compost. So that's something else to consider. But they're not. It's not. Compost is much easier to pull weeds from, or even to hoe, than soil. It's not sticky, it's soft and crumbly. So it makes a nice surface that stays there. It's never dug in, whatever. So, yeah.
Can you start off, I mean, for somebody that doesn't have compost, could they start off with spent mushroom compost perhaps, or something like that?
Totally. God, I'm glad you asked that. Yeah, because, well, my definition of compost is anything decomposed. So, and it doesn't need to be perfect, especially if you put it on like late autumn coming up time now. and it sits there over winter, and it always goes softer, and the lumps break up in a bit of frost and that kind of thing. So you end up with a beautiful friable surface, even if it could be old animal manure, it could be mushroom compost, green waste compost you can buy, it could be leaf mold, it could even be old wood chip. If you go to the bottom of a pile of really old wood chip, there's often basically compost. So it's a very broad category of possibilities.
Yeah, well, that's interesting to know, because I think that will help an awful lot of people. I mean, because there's so many doubts. I think when you're explaining something not new, I was going to say something new. It's not new, but it's a different philosophy on how we manage our soil. And I think one of the most interesting things, I mean, you talk about feeding nitrogen off the cell walls, and the cell walls then regrow nitrogen. Well, that's just one thing that happens underneath the soil. There must be many, many others that we will never understand or never know about, perhaps. But, this mysterious world that's going on underneath there, it seems sacrilege to me to even put a spade into the ground now, listening to what you say.
That's nice. That's it, I think. Once you realise, it does feel wrong, actually. And it's one thing I love when I'm teaching that, explaining about no dig, and the comment I love to hear the most is someone saying, "Oh, this makes sense."
Yeah,
I know them. That they've understood it.
I do understand the value of mulch, because I mean, we're great in this garden for mulching. Late winter, early spring, stick a layer of mulch on, because that will stop the weeds germinating. Yeah. I'd never thought of doing it in the vegetable garden. It's ridiculous, isn't it? I mean.
That's interesting.
And also, I just suddenly thought we could recycle all those cardboard boxes that stuff arrives in today.
Yeah, right.
Because people don't go out to buy things quite so much; they buy on the internet. Inevitably, it arrives in packaging, and you wonder what the heck you're going to do with all of this stuff. Well, there you are. There's a use for it.
It's a one-off, though. It's just to be clear on that one, that you don't need to do the cardboarding every year.
Yeah.
So once you've covered your thickweed and then don't disturb your soil, in your case, it won't come back. There might be the odd one or two that you need to pull, but it's going towards in a very weed-free situation, and that's another interesting aspect of no dig. And I've come to see the soil as a living organism in its own right. It kind of has a consciousness almost, and when it's disturbed, it grows weeds as a recovery process, which also makes sense. Even with those words, weeds cover the soil, or they recover. And so that's the beauty of it. You leave it alone, you don't get many weeds after.
Yeah. And we should talk about, because obviously there are things like chickweed which are relatively easy to deal with. There are much, much more pernicious, determined, deep-rooted weeds. And I love the fact that you've been doing this for such a long time and paying attention, crucially, for such a long time, that in the book you talk about how long it takes to weaken some of those more determined weeds, which I suppose really we have to bow down to their desire to live. And it is years, actually, of sort of keeping, taking that top growth away and stopping them photosynthesizing in some instances.
Yeah, we've had a good example of that actually in the last 2 years, because I took on this piece of ground in February, March 2021, and oh boy, the near part of it is so full of bindweed. That's field bindweed, which it comes back so fast, doesn't it? And then you think, how am I ever going to get rid of this? But so we do the initial mulching that I've been mentioning with the cardboard, and we put on more compost. Actually, we put on 3 inches in this case, and that also does lift the soil fertility. It was just pasture field. Within about 2 months of beautiful bindweed-free gardening, and then suddenly the cardboard disintegrates and you see all these shoots appearing, and that's when we just do it with a trowel. Well, I say just. It is a lot of time, actually. It's a commitment. I look on it as an investment in the future, because we've now, 18 months later, that bindweed is really weak. I've done this before, so I kind of knew this would happen, but even so, it's really gratifying to see that. And this plot is becoming very clear of bindweed, not quite totally, and whenever we see it now, it's very doable, because it's weak and it's sporadic, it's here and there. We'll get to the point where there's pretty well none, actually. And again, that's the beauty of no dig, doing it this way, because if I try to dig out those bindweed roots, that's disturbing the soil.
So what in actual fact do you do, Charles, when the bindweed reappears?
Yeah, we do disturb the soil a bit. So what I got is these nice long thin copper trowel. I like the copper. It's an investment. It costs about £45. But if you're using a lot, if you're a professional gardener or doing a lot of gardening work, I would say that's a really worthwhile thing to have, because it slides in really easily, doesn't disturb the soil too much, and you can then, you go in almost vertically near where you see the bindweed shoot appearing, and give a little lever, you'll hear this gratifying scrunch as the deeper root breaks, and you can ease it out, sometimes lifting the trowel a little bit. And so we're getting out quite a bit. We never get the main parent root, or hardly ever, but we get out enough to weaken it quite quickly. So that's how we do it. It's not just pulling it.
Yeah.
Well, interestingly, in that respect, I had a guy on a course here once who, we were talking about mare's tail, which is even more difficult. And he said, I got rid of mare's tail once by hoeing. Everyone looked up in amazement, and he said, but it took 11 years. So, take your pick.
So yes, if you have mare's tail, it's going to be a long endeavour.
It's longer, yeah. But actually, something else with no dig is that no dig definitely improves drainage, and I've had this feedback a lot from people with really wet allotments and swampy ground. And it's about allowing again the soil life to sort it out, worm channels and everything like that, and also because you're not breaking the soil's natural capillary structure, water can flow more easily both down and up. Obviously, if you have a site that floods, it'll flood. You can't alter that. But just for wet soil after heavy rain, no dig really helps, and that's where mare's tail thrives. In those boggy conditions. So you're making it less likely for it to be there, and that's where weeds and pests actually, they're really interesting because they're hints, they're indications about things we can do to help things.
Now, I mentioned that in your 200 odd or pages, however many it is, of your kind of key varieties in the vegetable and herb directory, that's a very good title for it, you have lots and lots of favourite varieties with taste notes and tips on whether it harvests a bit later than the other variety you've mentioned. Is wonderful. Obviously, a big part of this podcast is show and tell, and it's a rare treat. We are pretty much obsessed with ornamentals most of the time. Few of our guests, Jack Wallington did bring along quite a few edibles that he uses in the ornamental garden, which I think I definitely want to try a bit more. But yeah, you're going to be our food guru, Charles, for all the people who follow this podcast and never get many tips on edibles. I'm afraid there's quite a lot of responsibility. Fortunately, you've got years and years of expertise to deal with that. So I think we should commence some show and tell.
I can't wait to see that fabulous head of green celery. I mean, how delicious is that?
You've got like a whole crate of stuff to show us behind you. So yeah, kick off show and tell. What have you brought first?
It's well, it was the biggest one of about 50. Celery, though, it must have had more water than the other plants because this is what makes it difficult, just getting enough water to it all the time. And in the summer we've had, this has been one of our biggest jobs, has been watering, and especially the celery. But it's taken me years to find out, to find a variety that really grows this well, because this is a bit of a story actually about the seed trade and how seed producers have tended to concentrate on hybrids, F1 hybrids, because they make more money for them, I think, and give a more reliable result. And the older open pollinated heirloom seeds, as they're called, have been neglected, and they're not the first they were. Like if you grow Evesham special Brussels sprout, for example, well, it's not special anymore, and I've heard a lot of seeds people say this. So that to get an F1 hybrid celery, which is what this is, it's called Victoria, bred by Tozers actually, who I take my hat off to. They're very, very good seed breeders in Surrey, based in Surrey. And since I've been growing Victoria, I've had more results like this. So yeah, I'd recommend it actually, and you can get it in small packets from people like King's and Mr. Fothergill's. Quite a few seed companies sell it. It's recognised, I would say, as the best celery to grow now at the moment.
It's a good point. You have a section on your book dedicated to this idea of sourcing seeds, and unfortunately, we are losing some of that with the heirloom varieties.
Well, absolutely, and it's so important because I've had this experience myself. You give all the love and attention to your soil. You get it all ready. You do the sowing. You do the planting. You get a rubbish result. And you've done nothing wrong. And I've been experiencing this with beetroot actually recently. Boltardy is very much my favourite variety, and I've been growing it for 40 years. So I've been doing that for long enough to have seen the change in this. The seed of the same name. It's the same name on the packet. Why shouldn't it be the same? But it's not, and it's been allowed to lapse. And apparently, there's two things going on: that the seed companies are not paying enough money to whoever grows the seed for them in the big fields. They should be going through roguing in the winter to pull out the less attractive roots, the roots of pale colour, the ones deformed, the ones growing loads of leaf and no root, that kind of thing. but they haven't been. So that we're getting more of that now in our seed packets, and possibly they were growing some Boltardy for seed too close to some fields of ruby chard. So there's a bit of that pollen got in as well. All sorts of things like this. Whereas if you grow F1 varieties, you don't get that happening, but you have to pay more for your seed. And also with F1s, you can't keep the seed. So with the Boltardy, I did that last year. I kept some seed. I should have brought my big one in, actually. No, I've still got a bit in the kitchen. I'll get it in a sec. Basically, I grew it and selected my 10 best roots, put them in the ground, grew the flowers, got the seed, and I had no idea, I'd never done it before, how it would work. And this is what...
I feel it. Here's one I prepared earlier moment coming on.
I can't wait to see this. My goodness, this is like the best kind of flower show, isn't it?
Whoa! Yeah, we've taken some out of the middle, actually, because on this is 3 kilogram beetroot. On my open day, people were saying to me, "Isn't that woody because it's so big?"
Yes, I was immediately thinking that.
Right, and so I thought, okay, well, let's see. So I got a knife and sliced off slivers for everyone to taste, and it's juicy and tender. And they were saying things like, "Oh, this is like carpaccio." So, but yeah, it's just a beautiful beetroot. So that's something else for your listeners, to take away. Don't worry if your beetroots get big. If your soil is good, I think it could, especially with no dig healthy soil. Just enjoy them, and they'll store really well. So this, if I hadn't cut it and we're eating it now, you could store this through the winter and still be eating it like in March next year. So
this is making me think, Charles, because you talked about F1 seeds, F1 hybrid seeds, and we all know that you don't get so many seeds in a packet, and they are more expensive.
Yeah.
But if you're getting results like that, we don't need masses and masses of vegetables. We need fewer vegetables.
Agree.
A superb quality.
I can show you another nice example of that. Look at this tomato.
I mean, that's peachy. That's reminding me of something.
Also, look at the gorgeous colour there. It's got a rainbow bit. I'm going to cut it for you, actually, and then you can see that in the middle. But it's called Sunheart, or it goes under lots of names, and it's generically they're oxheart type, so they have a slight point to them. And you should be able to pick these up. They're getting more common now. They're beautiful flavour, as well as being very productive. So, and that's open pollinated, so I can keep seed from this one. And if I cut this open now, you'll see this amazing pattern inside the...
Oh gosh, look at that.
Wow.
It's almost, it is like a heart, you can imagine that sort of veins.
Yeah, it's kind of, that veiny, marbly type effect through the middle.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then you can see it's a lot of flesh. There's not much seed or water in there. So it's very juicy, tender, and sweet, actually. So it's a win-win. These, I'd urge anyone to try. Generally, oxheart types are really good. There's so much to find out about all this sort of thing. It's amazing. And then look at this as well. Pick these this morning.
These are some pretty fantastic aubergines.
I'd never grown such long ones, and it's partly the variety and partly the summer we've had. It's called De Barbentane, French name, and it's open pollinated. I got the seeds actually from Bingenheim seed company in Germany, who sadly it's now difficult because of Brexit to get their seeds, but they do send them to the Seed Cooperative in Lincolnshire, so that's worth looking at them. And I don't know, this one doesn't, I grew it last year, it wasn't so long, but really productive and delicious.
You obviously liked our sunny spell this summer.
Oh yeah, I mean, although it's been dry, it's been fantastic, hasn't it, the sunshine?
Well, the sun makes everything so much more flavorful. I mean, I think the outside tomatoes this year have been more delicious than they have for a long time, because we've had this very high temperatures and lovely clear skies.
I so agree. We're noticing it in carrots as well, actually. They're much sweeter than usual.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. There's a bit, and lots of people who grow veg will know this, but I've only grown a little bit of veg in my life. I can claim no expertise at all on that front, or many fronts, to be honest. But you talk a bit about, how lack of water can improve flavour and yield, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, here's an example of that. This is a sweet pepper called Flynn, Flymm. These are called snack peppers, and they are just sweet. You can eat them. There's very few seeds, and all the seeds are clustered near the top. So you can just chomp, chomp, chomp until you get right to the end. And yeah, they're something that you don't want to overwater too much. I'm just in the process actually of doing some bricks tests, which is where you can get a portable refractometer and measure the sugar content. And brewers do this like for cider and beer, just to see how much alcohol they're going to have at the end of the process. And I was doing something last night and comparing, believe it or not, kale. You know, there is sugar in kale leaves. It was actually 5%. Celery, 4%. It's surprising, leaves. And then a sun gold tomato, which is famously sweet, that's 10. And then I did a beetroot, and that was also 10. So, you know, that's kind of strange, isn't it? You think?
Yeah, it is.
But it's because I think the beetroot's got so much earthy flavour. It's like that sort of gets in the way of the sweetness, if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the two that really stood out, I tested an apple, a Ribston Pippin, and that was 18. One of the highest readings I've seen from an apple. And I think that's related to what you were saying, Alan, the dry weather.
Yeah.
And then I got a gorgeous plum called Coe's Golden Drop. And that was 22.5, which is, again, such a high reading. I'm just going to show you that one, actually. It's not much to look at because it's splitting a bit as we come off the rain. And these are like sugar bombs. It's quite remarkable. And it's a nice variety of plum because it matures later than, say, Victoria. And over quite a long period. So you can just go to the tree and pull off a few ripe ones every so often.
Oh,
I think it's really interesting that you've shown the Coast Golden Drop looking, shall we say, in its raw state, because I mean, a lot of people that don't know, younger than I am, that have been brought up with the fact that plums come in plastic bags, you know, they probably don't realise that you can eat those plums. You don't have to eat the bad bit if you don't want to.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
I was brought up before the age of supermarkets, and vegetables looked like vegetables, and they looked lumps and bumps, warts and all, you know. But they were all edible. Yeah,
totally. I couldn't agree more. And it's something that one just has to get people used to, I suppose. But I find it when I'm selling cucumbers, like that. This is one of my favourite varieties. It is an F1 hybrid though, and because I cannot find a non-hybrid cucumber that people will buy, if they want a long cucumber, that is. And even this one, do you see it's got a slight curve on the end?
Yeah.
Whoa, that's pushing it a bit. in terms of
all right, Charles, they all have one way or the other.
Well, yeah, if it's on a shelf, you know, it's just got to look perfect. Or that's the understanding, you know, that. So yeah, it's hard to get past that. And even, you know, there's a Brandywine tomato, for example, which again, a bit like you were saying, Alan, it's not the perfect tomato. The bit of sort of splitting.
I don't know. I think a lot of people would be pretty pleased to have that on their plate.
I should hope so. Yeah, I mean,
I'd eat it right now.
Yeah, the brandy ones, actually, I really recommend them. You know, so much flavour. That's the red one. And then the yellow ones tend to be a bit rounder. So, you know, nice choices. And they're not usually that enormous. They're pretty big, but always good flavour.
Yeah.
Open pollinated so you can keep the seeds.
I think when I did grow a bit of veg, when I'd first started getting into gardening, and I not, you know, no, nothing disparaging about my family, but we'd never grown any food, and I think I had been, from my, you know, my generation, indoctrinated into the perfect veg. And I think growing your own food is the ultimate route into eating stuff that is a bit wonky or marked, because obviously you put all this effort in, you're going to eat it unless it's completely ruined. You are determined to get your food at the end of it. So it helps you realize it doesn't have to look perfect.
Yeah, it's like I was saying about compost as well. You know, I think many people are used to buying compost in sacks from the garden centre. It always looks perfect. Very nice. And when you start using your own compost, it's not like that. But don't worry, you know, actually what's in there is more important, and your own compost will have lots of microbial life, and that's what's important, which you can't really buy.
Well, that's another interesting thing with compost, isn't it? A friend of ours, Richard Hobbs, I remember him saying on the radio once when we were working together, if you were to ask people, you know, normal people who don't garden, if you were to give them different compost to look at, some sort of very black, fine soil with nothing in it, they'd be like, that's the one I want, that's the best compost. But actually, you know, ask a really top gardener and they're probably going to go for something completely opposite.
Yeah, it could be, because that's what one of Elaine Ingham's points, you know, if it's too black, it's probably got too hot. And the good compost is actually more brown than black. So the black color, nice as it looks, it shows it's had bacterial decomposition at very high temperature, which it will be good in the end once it's in your garden, but the microbial life has been knocked out of it by the heat. So it needs to sit on the ground, on the surface, and then all the microbes come up from below and colonize it, and it becomes really good actually in the end. But at the point at which you buy it, it's somewhat dead.
I naturally have a feeling that the darker it is, the less I want it.
Oh, that's a good one then.
I really just feel that. I mean, I've always felt that, and without any reason, without any knowledge or anything.
Yeah.
That's too dark. I don't want that. I want the stuff that's sort of brown and crumbly, and I don't even mind if it's got a bit of smell to it either, because it's got to be good.
Excellent. Yeah, that's instinctive. I just wanted to show you this melon too. This is a seed a friend gave me actually. It's called an Ogen, and that's what I can't convey, I'm afraid, on the screen or podcast. The gorgeous aroma, and that's the best way of knowing if a melon's ripe. But this variety, I'd warmly recommend any type of Ogen. That's Ogen, because it's resistant to mildew. I've grown it alongside other varieties, and they've succumbed to mildew. It's been a bad summer for mildew, I think, quite generally.
Because dryness.
This one hasn't. So if you got leaves still without mildew at this time of year, it means they're sweeter. They can photosynthesize and put the sugars into the fruit.
Now, a lot of people are wary of growing melons outside. Did you grow that outside?
In the polytunnel. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
No. I was just going to say, because a lot of people think that you can't grow melons outside because our summers are not really long enough.
Well, can you in Norfolk? I mean, here in Somerset, we struggle actually.
Yeah, we've got the lowest rainfall in the country here. It's supposed to be 20 inches a year, and I think that possibly, Charles, there's going to be a time when we can fairly easily grow them outside, because our summers are getting longer. When we don't have frosts, and we'd hardly ever get a frost here until after Christmas anyway.
Wow.
So the autumns are longer. I don't know whether that will help or not, but in the polytunnel, I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
Yeah, very much. I mean, the same with these aubergines. I would not be expecting to do that outside.
No.
But I've got one more thing I want to show you. Is this gorgeous Radicchio.
Yeah.
These are one of my favorites for autumn, and I love them for their flavor. They're bittersweet.
Yeah.
And the bitter flavors have been quite ignored in the UK, and they're valuable for our health. They're really good for the liver, apparently. But you got the sweetness because it launched in the heart. And this variety is something that's taken me a long time to find. I grew Radicchios for 35 years without doing this. And then recently I came across this. This has been bred in Italy, I think, quite recently. And so basically you've got a strong chance when you put in your plant in the ground that you're going to get something like that. Whereas a lot of the older varieties just don't do it. Some will make a nice heart and a lot never do for whatever reason. They haven't been bred tightly enough. So that's the name of that one is 506 TT. Not a very romantic name. And there's another one called 206 TT, which gives you a Treviso type head, and that means it's long and thin with big fat white ribs. Really pretty as well. And that can grow without blanching. These just grow outside. And that's another nice thing about them. They're a second half of the year planting. So I sow these in early July. And I have plants ready that can go in after things like onions. What do you put in after your onions? Otherwise, it's getting toward, after midsummer. And this is
that's why we grow Oriental vegetables, you see.
Right, exactly. Yeah, totally. And you can also put in bulb fennel and quite a few other things actually at this time. But this is one of my main ones, and endives as well. Chicory and endive, really good.
I think that looks absolutely stunning. In spite of the fact it's 506 TT, we'll forgive it that.
Yeah, we'll make a note. Get some seeds. Early July next year.
Yeah.
And it's worth saying for anyone who's watching this for the first time, all the episodes come with full plant lists in the show notes. So whether you're listening or watching, you can just look down in the notes below to see all of the varieties that Charles is mentioning, because I think we all want to grow them, even those of us who don't grow edibles. I wish I had more space. I'm so desperate to try all these things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, this idea of combining edibles and ornamentals, I think for the many-fold of us who have small gardens is something we need to try. And I imagine because you've been so dedicated to growing food to sell and, to eat yourself, it's not necessarily something you've done much of. But are you seeing people trying to mix the edibles in with their their ornamental gardens a bit.
Yeah, and I've tried it myself, and I would just, give a caveat to that, because when you've got an established ornamental bed, and particularly if you do things like chop and drop, and you've got quite a lot of undecomposed mulch on the surface, there'll be quite a few slugs there. That doesn't matter if you're growing roses and shrubs and that kind of thing, but for vegetables, it does need to be slug-free. And if you're not careful, you can waste quite a bit of time, losing plants. Which is why I've actually moved away from it a bit. I mean, I acknowledge that if it's the only space you've got, it's worth a try, but make sure it's plants that are not too slug sensitive. And that, that can even include tomatoes, actually, if you're putting them in quite big, but then also they need full sun if possible, to do something worthwhile. So there's all those different criteria. And vegetables I would say, are more difficult than ornamental plants because they're very demanding. They're not really natural plants. They're plants that have been bred over quite a long period to do things that we like. So yeah, don't be too ambitious. Try a few things, see what works.
That's very solid advice, because we always want to set ourselves up for a success. So
yeah, totally.
I'll bear slugs in mind. They certainly like my garden. So
I think that's absolutely true. I was thinking a little while ago when you just started to talk about radicchio that it reminds me of the days when you actually picked a lettuce and you had to wash the slugs out of it. I mean, because we did, as children, we did, and then you stick the leaves in a tea towel, you throw them over your head like a mad thing to get the water out, and then, of course, you let go of one end, the lettuce leaves go all over.
Yeah, but that's exactly it. Back in the 80s, before salad bags were invented, I grew a lot of lettuce, and I was selling it to shops and wholesale, and I could never sell to restaurants because there was always a slug or two in there.
Yeah,
and chefs just got time to be faffing around with that. So then when salad bags happen, we break up the leaves and mix them in water, and the slugs fall to the bottom. I hope most of them anyway. So the lettuce I sell now is slug free, and that's made a huge difference.
Yeah,
and actually, slugs are not the veg gardener's friend. They're not really any gardener's friend, part of the natural balance, I'm sure, but still not something any of us want to see. And I think when people are making a veg plot, they do often make these sort of wooden raised beds, when we did episode 31 and we talked about this, you explained, and it's probably worth reiterating for people who haven't seen it, that is often creating all these wonderful little nooks and crannies for these things to live in.
I'm afraid so, yeah. In the first 2 years or so, you'll be all right because the wood's still new and there's not so much habitat. But as that wood starts to decay a bit, you get these cavities of rotting wood, perfect hiding place for slugs on a sunny day. And then as soon as it's dusk, out they come, have a meal. So yeah, this is where, again, going back to that original thing I was saying with no dig, and people say I couldn't do it because I can't afford the compost, but a lot of people spend a lot of money on wood, and if you cut that expense out of it, spend it on compost instead. That's your long-term investment that's going to really give you benefit for many years to come. A slightly larger dose initially, and then going forward. So we're putting on about an inch a year, 2.5 centimeters. That's enough, and we're getting 2 crops a year. Because again, that's the thing, that compost is not like fertilizer, so it doesn't wash away. The nutrients don't wash away. So you put it on once, and you've got long-term fertility.
So if you've got yourself a small compost bin and you compost all the tops of the vegetables that you're going to use in your house and anything that will actually rot down and make that compost, you become full circle, don't you?
It's beautiful, yeah. And that's a good point, because actually one thing I wanted to mention is we compost weeds. We compost the bindweed roots I was saying about. They go on the compost heap. We compost everything, and it all disappears. And I'm totally confident in saying that. I know from long experience, because I know that often people are told that you shouldn't put bindweed roots or whatever on the compost heap. I assure you, you can. Even if it's not hot, I've done that as well over winter. And you can put blighted material as well on the compost heap. That blight spores cannot survive in soil and compost. They need living plant tissue to survive.
We're talking about potato and tomato blight specifically.
Yeah, I'm mentioning that because I know people worry about it a lot. And I just, again, know from experience. And also, if you look at the literature, it's very clear about this point. So I don't know why, you sometimes, you hear this so much that you can't do that, but you can. And, there's a lot of myths out there. Don't believe everything you hear. And try things out as well. Don't be afraid to try a few things.
I have to say, Charles, you're such a guru at this. I mean, it's just marvelous. The pearls of wisdom are coming out. It's wonderful.
Thank you very much. That's nice. I'd really like to get the record straight, because I get so many questions. people have got so puzzled because they hear conflicting information from different
Yeah,
sources.
exactly.
What is actually the truth here? And I'm not claiming I know all the truth, but I've got enough experience that I feel I can pretty much put them on the right road, at least, And every garden's different. That's a very beautiful thing about it. And so there'll always be different details. But if you get that understanding, that's what you need.
Yeah.
Well, and the understanding obviously comes from experience as well, and that's why we feel like we can trust the person who doesn't just say it based on 1 year of doing it, but on many decades of doing it. Not to focus on that too much, Charles. One of the things that I also thought was a great takeaway was you wood chip your paths. I think you'll have quite narrowish paths, and they're wood chipped.
Yep. So my favourite layout would be 4-foot beds, 1.2 meters, and 16-inch 40-centimeter pathways. And because you haven't got wooden sides, you can have quite narrow pathways because the sides aren't getting in your way. And you can push a wheelbarrow up even a 12-inch, 30-centimeter path, and it doesn't matter if the wheelbarrow legs sit on the bed while you're spreading your compost or whatever, because that's the beautiful thing also about no dig. You can walk on your beds. It doesn't compact because you haven't broken the structure in any kind of cultivation. So with these narrow pathways, we put on just a thin layer of wood chip. We put, before winter, all of the soil is covered for the year with a little bit of wood chip on the path, at the same depth as compost, about 1 inch. And that feeds the fungal life more and also retains moisture and improves the soil of the pathway, because the pathway is living soil. That's an important point. I think people worry that because they're walking on it all the time, that it's just dead soil, it's just a path. But actually, path is part of your garden. And we've seen it this summer where vegetables on the edge of beds close to the pathways grow bigger than the ones in the middle of the beds, because if you get a shower, their roots can nip out. It's called opportunistic rooting, quite horizontal roots, and pick up that moisture. So look after your paths.
Never thought of that, you see.
Exactly. Revelation after revelation.
Yeah.
Well, it's all in the book.
But I think the idea of 4-foot beds is absolutely wonderful, because it means that you don't have to walk on your beds to weed them. You can if you need to weed them, get your kneeling mat out and just reach to the middle, and you can do that from either side. So that's a very good tip, I think.
But you can put your foot in the middle. We do, if it's I don't know, something more difficult to pull out, or when we're harvesting garlic, that's quite tenacious roots. And so we'll often be putting a foot in the middle of the bed. But I'm just saying this to reassure people that it's not like.
Do you actually just pull your garlic up?
Well, it depends actually. I like to, if possible. But sometimes it doesn't come out without snapping the stalk, so we'll use a trowel, just slip it underneath to cut the roots a bit.
Yeah.
And then I will, though, because we've then loosened the ground quite a bit to get the garlic out, we'll walk on the bed just to push it down again. I want my bed surface to be firm. I don't want it to be all loose and fluffy, which would make it lose moisture. And roots need firm soil to move in and anchor plants. And this is a bit of a lie, really, being sold to us by the people who make rotivators and things. You don't need that loose, fluffy soil. You want it firm.
Well, I feel like we could talk to you for hours about all of this, but I know you've got places to be, and we haven't done FLOMO yet. If you've never watched this podcast before, this is basically an excuse to get more plants into the chat. FLOMO is the way Alan and I live our lives, going around having a fear of missing out about flowers and plants that we desperately want to grow with no real space to grow veg. I am now really drowning in edible related FLOMO, I'll be honest. And actually, I already was in that I was going back through some photos of when I'd visited Chatsworth, must have been last year. And obviously their cutting garden is fabulous. And I saw an amaranthus I'd meant to grow called Red Army, which was huge. It was over 1 meter, beautiful, lovely, dark reddish purple colour and these fabulous, plumes on the top. And, technically when I grow, here comes Alan, is that Red Army?
Yes.
Oh, you got it. Wow.
That is a piece of Red Army that was a self-sown plant in my vegetable garden this year, and it's huge. It's as big as a person, and this is just a side branch from it. Absolutely fantastic thing. I just couldn't bear to pull it up because it had chosen to be there, and I thought, well, you may live. But
it'll leave a legacy, won't it, of millions of seeds?
Absolutely.
I think we want millions. I'll have some. I'm likely to eat it, but there we go. There's an edible that I can put in my ornamental garden and it will look beautiful. I grew several shorter Amaranthus this year, and they are absolutely beautiful. I kind of had them planted up in mixed pots, and that wonderful, the red varieties, that lovely reddy leaf was such a foil for all of the flowers that were around them. So that's my Flomo, a sort of edible, to fit in with the vibe of this podcast. Charles, where are you at with your Flomo? Is there anything you particularly want to try?
I would like to find a red sunflower, actually. And I don't know if such a thing exists, but one with really red petals. And I did grow one this year, and they turned out orange, a rusty orange, which is still very striking. But in terms of edibles, I'd love to find a more rust-free garlic. I might be asking the impossible there, because rust on garlic leaves has become a significant problem over the last few years, and many people say this, not everyone. And I don't really understand how it spreads. The climatic conditions vary. I've had it in dry springs, I've had it in wet springs, and so on. And so that's probably my main ambition. And also, I'd love to find a non-hybrid, great greenhouse cucumber with a smooth skin and nice long one.
Well, if you've got any ideas, comment below. We'll make sure Charles gets the information.
I think what's very interesting is that these things that Charles is wishing for could be lurking. I mean, they could be lurking, not necessarily in this country, they could be anywhere in Europe, if you like, or even further afield. But, where people have particularly not been scientifically breeding their plants, and they've had varieties which they don't even know what they are anymore, but they go down from one generation to the next, so on and so forth. They could well be out there.
That's a really good point, Alan. And this could be the trigger. We'll find it.
Many years ago, I was an antique dealer, and I used to say, look, it doesn't matter how popular a piece of furniture is, because there's somebody out there that will love it. All you've got to do is find them. And it's the same with the seeds, Charles. All you've got to do is find them.
Okay.
So, Alan, where are you at with your Flomo this week?
Well, my Flomo has to be, I'm going to pinch it from Charles, because I just love the Radicchio there. Just loved it. And I do think there's a very good Italian seed company. I think they're quite good anyway. I can't remember what they're called. Can you, Charles? Franchi, is it?
Well, I have to be careful what I say here. But I wonder if you're thinking of Seeds of Italy.
That's
Franchi.
one. Seeds of Italy. I think
because I've been disappointed with their. I don't think they're breeding as tightly as they could.
Right.
I really don't. I've grown so many of their so-called chicories, and they make lovely plants, but they don't really fold in tight like that.
Yeah.
And it's
where did you get
special seed company? From Bingenheim, actually, in Germany, who source it from Italy, from quite a small seed company. But it will be available through the seed cooperative in Lincolnshire, so that's where you want to go.
He's writing it down.
I am, because this is, I've never heard of it.
Cool. Okay.
Because
also there's a lot of confusion with radicchios, and I don't think they make it clear enough on Seeds of Italy seed packets whether they'll put pictures like this up, and it turns out that happens when you force them.
Yeah.
So you grow, Treviso particularly, you grow the roots through the summer and autumn, and then you dig them up and force them over winter, and that's when.
Well, that's what we used to do. We used to sell the stairs in a flower pot.
Right.
And they'd be blanching in the dark and all the rest of it. But
it's a lovely thing to do in the winter.
It's a very even temperature, which is cool, very cool. But it worked.
Yeah, it does. But it's a lot of work, and it's actually a lot easier to do this, and they just grow.
Yeah, exactly. And that looks fantastic. So I'm going to explore those. I'm going to explore the seed cooperative in Lincolnshire. I must say, and thank you very much for that very valuable tip.
Good.
Well done.
They have 20 hectares. 20 hectares of greenhouse.
Really?
Yeah.
Before we let you go, Charles, you've actually got a no dig day coming up.
Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, we've decided to really celebrate it. 3rd November. We've created it. We've registered it. It's no dig day, and when people from all over the world can get together virtually online, put up a picture of a new bed you're making, or have a no dig lunch with your friends, or we're running competition, actually, the caption competition on my website, and also for children. You could enter any kind of photo or of something you've made, even a model, but to do with no dig. So we're really going to celebrate it.
Alan, you need to sort out your bed so that you can enter in the no dig day.
Yeah, it's a good trigger. We made it in November, incidentally, because that's a great time to, to start. It's the autumn can be the start of the gardening year. You get your ground ready for the following spring. It's a good time to put compost on or to make a new bed. So yeah, it's a very apt time.
Do you know, if it's possible, I've enjoyed this even more than episode 31, which I didn't think was possible. This has just been such a lovely way to spend an hour. Thank you very much for coming along with all these fabulous edibles. I cannot wait for when I get this mythical next garden where I have the space for a veg patch.
Great. Well, I wish you success and thank you very much.
And thank you for the book. Everyone needs to go and get it. No Dig. It does have a subtitle, doesn't it? It sort of looks like it's No Dig, but you open it and then it's got a little subtitle.
Oh yeah, I can't remember it.
Oh, I wrote it down. Nurture your soil to grow better veg with less effort. Now there's a motto for life.
Thank you, Thordis.
Have a lovely day, everybody, and happy gardening.
All the best. Lovely to talk to you, Charles. All the best.
And you, Alan. Yeah, bye-bye.
Can you see me?
I can't see you yet.
You still can't see me.
No, I can't. What's happened? Yes!
Right. Oh, you got it. Okay.
It worked.
Morning, Alan. Morning. Morning, Charles. How are you?
Wow, I thought you were in the potting shed, or maybe that is your potting shed.
His potting shed is quite glam, but it's not quite that glam. No wallpaper or dressers in the potting shed.
I just need to get my book. Sorry.
Do you want to pull your laptop a little closer? Because I think you're a bit far away. Or pull yourself closer. There we go. We want to be able to see your lovely face. I think Alan's got... Have you got a dog that wants to join you?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. She's being stupid this morning. Look.
Hearing about No Dig, she wants to join me.
Hello, Gigi. I think she's very much a fan of digging, to be honest.
She's very good at digging. Yeah.